The skyline of Doha glows in the soft morning light, the city's glass towers reflecting a region balancing between diplomacy and despair. At the Second World Summit for Social Development, global leaders have gathered to address poverty, inequality and rebuilding after war. But today, the United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres' message cuts far deeper, a plea to end two human tragedies unfolding in parallel: the spiralling conflict in Sudan and the fragile ceasefire on the brink of collapse in Gaza. Standing before reporters, Guterres speaks with a grave calm that has become familiar during times of crisis. I appeal for an end to the flow of weapons and fighters into Sudan, which is exacerbating an already desperate situation, he says. His tone tightens as he continues. Finally, we need an immediate cessation of hostilities. I call on the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces to work with my personal envoy to Sudan towards a negotiated agreement. Come to the negotiating table, put an end to this nightmare of violence. It is time for peace. The words hang heavy in the conference hall. For nearly 2 years, Sudan has been torn apart by a brutal struggle between General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the army chief and de facto head of state since the 2021 coup, and General Mohamed Hamdan Daglo, known as Hemeti, who commands the powerful Rapid Support Forces. Their fight for power has turned neighborhoods into battlefields, displaced nearly 12 million people, and created what the United Nations now calls the world's worst humanitarian crisis. As the Secretary-General speaks, images from across Sudan tell their own story. Fighters loyal to the RSF celebrate in the dusty streets of Al Fasher, brandishing weapons atop trucks. Just a few hundred kilometers away, government soldiers gather in Port Sudan, their last stable stronghold on the Red Sea coast, as Burhan delivers another defiant address promising victory. In the camps of Darfur, women carry their belongings on their heads, children trail behind, and men sit silently beside bundles that once filled their homes. Tawila, Naila, El Geneina, towns that have become synonymous with survival. Guterres' appeal in Doha is not just directed at the warring parties. It is also a warning to the international community, to governments, arms suppliers, and militias fueling the conflict from beyond Sudan's borders. For months, reports have pointed to regional actors supplying weapons to both sides, each seeking influence in a shattered state at Africa's crossroads. The Secretary-General's demand for a halt to this flow is as much about stopping the fighting as it is about restoring Sudan's sovereignty. Humanitarian agencies describe scenes of catastrophic deprivation, food supplies blocked, hospitals destroyed, and aid workers targeted. Entire provinces have been cut off, leaving civilians trapped between two armies. The United Nations estimates that hunger now threatens more than 25 million Sudanese, with cholera and malaria spreading rapidly through temporary camps. The conflict has already claimed tens of thousands of lives, many of them civilians caught in indiscriminate shelling. Against this backdrop, Guterres' message is clear: the violence must stop before Sudan collapses entirely. His special envoy, Ramtane Lamamra, continues to shuttle between Cairo, Addis Ababa and Port Sudan, seeking common ground between rival commanders who have yet to meet face-to-face since the war began. Come to the negotiating table, Guterres repeats. It is time for peace, but Sudan is only part of his warning. In the same breath, the UN chief turns to the Middle East, where another fragile peace is unraveling. I am deeply concerned about the continued violations of the ceasefire in Gaza, he tells journalists. They must stop, and all parties must respect the decisions of the first phase of the peace agreement. The truce he refers to, brokered by the United States, Egypt and Qatar, was meant to end 2 years of relentless warfare between Israel and Hamas. It began on October 10 last year, just days after the release of all surviving hostages abducted in Israel during the attacks of the 7th of October 2023. In exchange, Israel agreed to halt airstrikes and allow humanitarian convoys into Gaza, while Hamas pledged to return the remains of those who had died in captivity. Yet the peace has proved agonizingly short-lived. Israel accuses Hamas of delaying the return of bodies and allowing rocket fire from northern Gaza. Hamas, for its part, blames Israeli incursions and assassinations for shattering trust. The result has been a grim rhythm of ceasefire and retaliation, each cycle deadlier than the last. On October 19, Israeli strikes leveled several apartment blocks in Gaza City, killing 45 people. A week later, another barrage left more than 100 dead, nearly half of them children. Israel said the attacks were in response to the shooting of 3 soldiers along the border. Palestinian health officials called them collective punishment. The smoke still rose over the seaside towns of Buraij and Al Zawayda when footage emerged of militants standing beside Red Cross vehicles, a haunting symbol of blurred lines between combat and humanitarian space. From the air, the coastal road west of Gaza City appears as a scar across a landscape of rubble. The Al Rashid Highway, once a lifeline for commuters and aid trucks, is now littered with burned-out cars and twisted metal. For residents, the ceasefire means little when explosions continue to echo along the shore. Families returning to damaged homes move cautiously, uncertain which buildings might collapse next. In one neighborhood, a father gestures toward the remains of his house and says, "We believed the ceasefire would save us, but the bombs never stopped." His words capture a despair echoed throughout the enclave, where reconstruction efforts remain stalled and power lines dangle across empty streets. Guterres' call from Doha reverberates across these front lines. His voice, calm but urgent, reflects a broader frustration within the United Nations, whose repeated resolutions and humanitarian appeals have yielded few tangible results. More than a year after the initial truce, Gaza's humanitarian crisis deepens. Hospitals operate without fuel, clean water is scarce, and tens of thousands remain displaced. The Secretary-General has long warned that continued impunity by all parties undermines international law and faith in the peace process itself. In Gaza, the International Committee of the Red Cross continues to mediate prisoner exchanges and body recoveries under the fragile ceasefire terms. But even these humanitarian gestures have become fraught with danger. Convoys often come under fire, and aid workers navigate streets controlled alternately by Hamas police and Israeli drones overhead. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency estimates that over 70% of Gaza's population now relies entirely on aid, a figure that has only risen as economic blockades and power shortages persist. As the world's attention drifts from one crisis to another, Guterres' speech in Doha serves as a reminder that peace is neither automatic nor inevitable. It requires political courage and accountability. They must stop, he said, of the violations in Gaza, and all parties must abide by the decisions of the first phase of the peace agreement. It is a call not only to combatants, but to mediators, donors, and allies whose influence could yet stabilize a region teetering on collapse. In the corridors of the Doha Summit, delegates from Africa, the Middle East and Europe speak in hushed tones about the limits of diplomacy. Some point to the exhaustion of aid budgets drained by overlapping wars. Others warn that without decisive intervention, Sudan could become the next Syria and Gaza could slide into another lost generation of conflict and blockade. The mood is somber, the sense of urgency unmistakable. Outside the convention hall, the skyline of Doha stands in stark contrast, pristine, modern and calm. It is from here, a place of stability and ambition, that Guterres issues perhaps his most impassioned appeal yet. His words, though diplomatic, carry moral weight. They echo across continents, from the refugee camps of Darfur to the shattered streets of Gaza City, and reach those who have long ceased to believe the world is listening. He pauses briefly before repeating the line that has become both his conviction and his challenge to the world. Come to the negotiating table, bring an end to this nightmare of violence now. It's time for peace. Yet, as history shows, peace demands more than words. In Sudan, mistrust between rival factions runs deep, each accusing the other of atrocities and ethnic cleansing. In Gaza, political divisions between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority remain unresolved, complicating any lasting settlement with Israel. Diplomats describe both conflicts as mirrors of global paralysis, where geopolitical rivalries often override humanitarian imperatives. Still, Guterres insists that multilateralism must prevail. The United Nations, he argues, is not powerless but constrained by the will of its members. His role, he reminds the press, is to speak truth to power, to remind the world of its shared responsibility to prevent suffering. And so he does, invoking both moral authority and pragmatic realism. It is time for peace, he repeats once more. The cadence steady, the appeal unwavering. In Darfur, the call for peace sounds distant but not forgotten. Humanitarian convoys still cross desert roads under UN flags, bringing food and medicine to families who fled months ago. In Gaza, children return to shattered classrooms, teachers writing lessons on blackboards cracked by nearby blasts. These are small acts of resilience that, in Guterres' view, justify every diplomatic effort, however slow or imperfect. The Secretary-General's message, delivered in Doha but aimed at the conscience of the world, reminds us that the measure of leadership lies not in power but in compassion. Whether in Sudan's parched camps or Gaza's crowded hospitals, the appeal is the same: to stop the killing, to protect civilians, and to rebuild what war has destroyed. As the cameras fade and the conference disperses, Doha returns to its rhythm, but the echoes of the UN chief's words remain. 2 wars, 2 continents, and one message that bridges them both: the world cannot turn away. And as the final images roll of smoke rising over Al Zawayda, of weary families at Tawila camp, of aid workers unloading supplies in the dust, the narration closes with the same conviction that began it. Peace is not a distant hope, it is a decision waiting to be made. And for the people of Sudan and Gaza, that decision cannot come soon enough.